Hello everybody and welcome back, and this time we are finally actually in the new game, talking about the new game. And I have to say thank you so much for everybody new tuning into the last one. I was absolutely overwhelmed when I woke up on the 13th and I saw that my video had just exploded into nowhere. So I kind of didn't want to do this video because I thought I would wait until Codemasters nerf the cars, which is still coming by the way. But I'd say I still have to make an update on my first setup guide, make the episode 2 to make sure that you guys are not on the wrong trail or missed some stuff that is going to be important for over the next coming weeks, because I don't think the nerf is coming anytime super soon. I'm expecting kind of early to mid-August, but I have no detailed information on that, obviously. Today I will go through my France setup that I made, which is quite good. As you can see, I did a decent time. I think I'm not too horrible at it. And to just show you what are the kind of traps that you shouldn't be using and what you should be using. So we're basically revising, and we're going to start off with the aerodynamics. And at France we have 9-6 wings for me. You can also use 8-6 wings and also 10-6 wings, to be honest. But this is of course the inverted wings we talked about, but this is very track specific on this game. So basically you want to be looking at, are your front tires wearing out more, or are your rear tires wearing out more? And this is going to give you a good judgment on whether you want to run inverted wings or a more normal wing setup. So for example, for a track like France, the fronts are dying very hard, so you're looking at inverted wings, 9-6, 10-6 wings. Some people were running 5 rear wing, but that's very, very unstable and really only time trial only. Another big thing is that actually compared onto last year, you only had to make the setup stable for qualifying because the car would be stable in the race. This time it's actually the other way around. You will have to make the car stable for the race, which means it's going to be slightly understeer in qualifying. So that's very important to keep in mind, that this kind of meta has shifted. Last year we were very focused on qualifying oriented setups. This game you will have to actually test the setups in the race and adjust them accordingly, which will then feel a bit worse in qualifying, but that's something you have to live with. So for example, I said France is inverted. For example, a track like Bahrain, which everyone has been driving because it's the first game of the track, is not inverted because the rear tires are so much under pressure due to the difficult braking and traction spots. Then we move on to the transmission. I said in the comments that you should basically fully lock the differential. I think I was pretty wrong at that actually. So the on-throttle diff is probably something between 70 to I'd say 90% maximum. The higher you go, the more quali oriented it becomes, I believe. And the lower you go, the lower the tire wear in the end will be, unless you of course spin. The first big trap is the off-throttle differential, and this is the one I have completely overlooked, to be totally honest. A running low off-throttle diff is nothing but a trap on this game because it will make the rear unstable on entry. It will make traction harder because the car is already sliding, and it doesn't really make you faster because you can get the turn in from the wings or the suspension geometry. So running a low off-throttle diff like 53 or 54, which I have been running before, is a big trap on this game, and I wouldn't recommend it. Like the lowest I would go is probably 56 off-throttle diff, and on tracks with longer corners I would definitely aim towards a higher ratio, which is why France is currently sitting at 59 or 58. I think one of the two. Suspension geometry. Front camber was where I talked about that you might lower it if you were struggling in long corners. I think after revising this is actually wrong again. So I've been wrong on quite a lot of things, but then again, my first setup guide was before I actually drove the game. So front camber should be on the front pretty much if you're running tracks like France, Silverstone, Belgium, tracks with long corners where you need a lot of and not a lot of negative front camber. Tracks where you will be struggling on traction, tracks where you will have a lot of low speed, you will definitely lower the front camber, for example. But on tracks like France or Silverstone or Belgium, you would rather increase the rear camber to help with the stability. But for my setup, I kind of felt like this was unnecessary. Though after driving it in the race, I think increasing the rear camber is definitely an option for my setup, and I probably would recommend it. Front toe is not a trap on this game. It is seriously powerful. So I recommend 1 or 2 clicks to try it out always, not more. But you will have to be careful if you're running front toe on tracks with aggressive long corners where you can lose the car, because that's where front toe will be weakest. And France has quite a lot of those, so I decided to remove the front toe. Rear toe, on the other hand, is the biggest trap of the universe, and never use it, please. Thank you very much. Moving on to the suspension, and this is something that you probably did not expect to see. So yes, I'm running 2020-ish suspension and roll bar settings. So we're on 1.6 suspension. You can totally use 1.5 as well. In terms of front suspension, I think 1 or 2 is fine, and rear suspension, anything under 3 is not recommended. People have been experimenting with 1.1 suspension, but personally, whenever I drive it, the car just feels horrible on corner entry. It's undrivable. It's way too understeer, and that's why people have been complaining about long corner understeer. It's because their rear suspension is not high enough. So I'd recommend anything from 4 up to 6. If you go to 1.7 suspension, the suspension actually starts to matter and hurt really much over curbs. So I wouldn't do that. You can drive 1.7 suspension, but it's very, very tricky. The front roll bars have to be quite together. I don't think they have to be inverted. Like, you still need some mid-corner rotation on this car, definitely, to help with the long corner understeer that obviously still exists. I would never run one front roll bar. I've tried it and it feels absolutely horrible. Don't do it. Like, the minimum I would go is 2 front roll bar, and then it just depends on the track with how far you can go in terms of the roll bar, and how it depends to all the other settings, as always. So it's a bit like to the 2020 game, but closer together. So like, I'd say 3 to 4 is the difference between front to rear roll bar you should be aiming for on most tracks. Front right height, I've tried one front right height, but you really get a problem if you're taking curbs on corner entry with the front tires, which is what you do at France quite a lot. So I wouldn't recommend it. I think 2 front right height is kind of the sweet spot for most tracks. You can run. I would rather run 3 on others. And rear right height is the thing that actually gives you stability to stop the car from oversteering and completely snapping in long speed corners, like the long right hander in France. So if you run 6 rear wing, it's rather prone to oversteering and you're losing the car, which is as opposed to where I increased it to 8 to make sure that the rear is stable. If you go to 9, the rear actually starts to become rather understeery, and you would have to mess with the roll bar, which then messes up the car cornering in the middle. So I wouldn't recommend it. This is why I've landed on 2.8 suspension for France, and I would recommend anything between 2.6 and 2.8 for most tracks. And of course, 3 right height, front right height for tracks with even more curbs. Brakes, 100% brake pressure as usual. I don't see a point in lowering them, honestly. The front brake bias is something that needs to be changed. Sometimes, almost always, on each track, and sometimes even during the lap. So in France, for example, I have it set to standard to 55 for most corners, and then for the fast chicane in the middle sector, the left-right, I set it to 56 to stop the rear from locking, which is really important. And in the race, I set it to 56 in that corner and the slow left in the final sector as well, to make sure that the car at the rear doesn't slide. So this is something that you have to test for yourself. It of course depends on your suspension settings, how aggressive is your car on entry. It is affected by your roll bar, it is affected by your suspension geometry, it's affected by your off throttles, by your aerodynamics. So you have to keep in mind that all these settings interact with each other. And if you're running, for example, the pure standard setup with inverted suspension and inverted roll bars, I think you can actually go quite low on the front brake bias in most corners, like going to 53 or 52 even, and then bumping it up for the hairpins again. However, if you run a more normal setup, a more aggressive setup, you definitely want to go 55, 56, maybe even a 57. I do not know, to be honest. This will always depend on you, your driving style, and the setup you are using. Then on the tires, we have another trap, which would be running high front tire pressure. I do not think that it is worth it. Running minimum front tire pressures is also bad, so I would run always a click or two, maybe three. And then rear tire pressure, you can run maximum if the tire temps allow it. So basically, you will always have to check if the tire temps are a problem. I checked it for France, for example. For me, the rear tire temps go up to 102 degrees on the softs, which would be a problem on the 2020 game. However, they changed the soft tire at France in the 2021 game, where the car actually starts to overheat at 104 to 105 degrees. So I am fine with running 23.5 psi. Though I think if for adapting even more to race setup, running 23.1 psi would be even better. But in general, low front tire pressures, very high rear tire pressures. I hope you enjoyed this second episode. I will not do any track guides or track hot lap and setup specifics until the cars are nerfed, because I feel like that is just wrong to do. So I will keep doing these generic settings so you can do your setups for yourself, for career mode, for my team, because those rules all apply that I've just told you in that. And I would just recommend to have fun with the game, play it how you want to, and don't sweat it too hard right now, to be honest, because it's all gonna change anyway in a couple of weeks. So until then, see you, have a good day everyone, and bye bye.